My name is Mike. I'm 63 years old. I sent $50,000 to marry a 25-year-old woman in Bangkok. 3 days later, she never existed. No address, no phone, no trace. And the worst part? She made me fall in love first. What was supposed to be the ultimate retirement dream has twisted into a relentless, waking nightmare from which I cannot escape. Every morning I open my eyes, and for a split second, the illusion holds. I expect to feel the warm, tropical breeze and hear a loving voice, but then the crushing weight of reality slams into my chest. I traded my financial security, my self-respect, and my future for a beautifully packaged lie sold to me on a brightly colored website. The humiliation is so deep, so agonizing, that there are days I can barely look at my own reflection in the mirror without feeling physically ill. You might be sitting there, secure in your home, wondering how a grown man with a lifetime of experience could possibly fall for something so obvious and ruin his own life. You might think you are too smart, too cynical, or too cautious to ever let a stranger drain your bank accounts and strip you of everything you own. But let me tell you, this destruction did not happen through a sudden, violent robbery. It happened slowly, through 1,000 tiny, calculated cuts that felt exactly like love. I am going to tell you exactly how it happened. Not to gain your sympathy, but because I need you to understand the mechanics of this trap. To understand the magnitude of this disaster, you have to understand the desolate landscape of my life before I ever typed a web address into my browser. My existence in the United States had become a hollow shell, a quiet suburban purgatory following a bitter divorce that stripped away my sense of family and belonging. I was living alone in a house that was far too quiet, surrounded by empty rooms that echoed with the memories of a life that no longer existed. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of waking up, eating alone, and staring at a television screen until I was tired enough to sleep. But the true darkness in my life, the wound that never healed, was the loss of my son to a drowning accident many years ago. That tragedy fractured my soul in a way that time could never repair, leaving a permanent, aching void right in the center of my chest. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and to survive it, I turned to the only remedy I could find: alcohol. For years, I drank to numb the memories, to silence the what-ifs, and to artificially manufacture the sleep that my tormented mind refused to grant me on its own. The drinking eventually cost me what little joy I had left, alienating my remaining friends and turning me into a ghost haunting my own life. I managed to hold on to a soul-crushing bureaucratic job, going through the motions every day like a mechanized drone with absolutely no passion or purpose. I felt completely invisible to the world, a forgotten relic of a man walking through crowded streets where no one ever looked my way or cared if I drew breath. I had lost all zest for life, resigning myself to a gray, joyless march toward an inevitable and lonely end. My daily routine felt like sitting in a sterile, windowless waiting room for death, just flipping through old magazines while waiting for my name to be called. There was no color, no excitement, and absolutely no hope that tomorrow would bring anything different than the bleakness of today. But human beings are not designed to survive indefinitely without hope, and deep down, a desperate, starving part of me was clawing for a way out of the dark. I began to spend my evenings staring at my computer screen, nursing a glass of whiskey, wondering if maybe, just maybe, I could start over somewhere far away, where nobody knew the broken man I had become. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that I stumbled across an online forum discussing the lives of expatriates in Southeast Asia, specifically in Bangkok, Thailand. The stories were intoxicating. Men my age, ordinary men who had been just as lonely and discarded by Western society, were living like kings in a tropical paradise. They spoke of the deep respect for elders, the incredibly low cost of living, and, most importantly, the traditional values of the women there. Suddenly, the gray walls of my life seemed to crack, letting in a blinding ray of possibility that I had not felt in decades. I began obsessively researching Asian bride agencies, clicking through endless pages of vibrant photographs and professionally produced introduction videos of stunningly beautiful women. The sites were designed to perfection, selling not just a dating service but the promise of salvation, a guaranteed ticket out of my miserable isolation. It felt like finding a lush, vibrant oasis in the middle of a scorching, endless desert, a place where my thirst for affection and relevance could finally be quenched. The logic seemed perfectly sound to my desperate mind. I had a decent retirement fund, and they had a culture that valued commitment and care over superficial materialism. That is when I saw her profile. Her name was Olivia. She was 25 years old, and her smile seemed to radiate a genuine warmth that cut straight through my cynical heart. Her biography spoke of wanting a mature, stable man to build a quiet life with, explicitly stating she was tired of the immaturity of younger men in her country. I stared at her picture for hours, my heart pounding with a forgotten rhythm. terrified of rejection, but entirely consumed by the fantasy of her looking at me with admiration. My hands were physically shaking over the keyboard as I purchased the agency's communication credits, took a deep breath, and sent that very first, fateful message into the dark. The response came faster than I could have ever anticipated, and from that moment, my descent into the illusion began with breathtaking speed. Her messages were not just polite, they were deeply inquisitive, affectionate, and tailored to make me feel like the most fascinating man she had ever encountered. We quickly moved from the agency's expensive messaging system to daily video calls, bridging the massive time difference between the United States and Bangkok. Seeing her face on my screen, hearing her soft voice call my name, was a more powerful narcotic than the alcohol I had relied on for years. I completely stopped drinking almost overnight, entirely replaced by the intoxicating high of being desired and valued by someone so young and vibrant. I started waking up at 3 in the morning just to catch her before she went to sleep, completely disregarding my own health and routine just to bask in her attention. She asked about my day, listened intently to my stories, and showered me with compliments that carefully rebuilt the masculine ego I thought was permanently destroyed. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not as a grieving father or a discarded husband, but as a strong, capable protector. She told me about her life in Bangkok, painting a picture of a hard-working girl struggling against the odds, yet remaining overwhelmingly optimistic and full of love. She never asked for anything during those first few months, focusing entirely on building a deep emotional connection and planning our hypothetical future together. We talked about the house we would rent near the beach, the food she would cook for me, and the quiet, peaceful life we would share away from the stress of the modern world. I was living inside a perfect movie script, where every scene was more magical than the last, completely unaware that I was just the actor, and she was the director controlling the entire production. The loneliness that had defined my existence completely vanished, replaced by a euphoric, almost delirious state of constant anticipation for our next conversation. I found myself smiling at work, my colleagues noticing the sudden change in my demeanor, though I kept my tropical secret fiercely guarded. I was walking on air, convinced that the universe was finally rewarding me for all the suffering and loss I had endured throughout my life. I was young again, my heart beating with the frantic energy of a teenager in love, entirely blind to the sheer impossibility of the situation. Every morning brought a new "Good morning, my handsome king" message, accompanied by photos of her daily life that made me feel intimately involved in her world. I started mentally calculating my retirement funds, looking at real estate listings in Thailand, and mapping out the logistics of selling my belongings in the States. The fantasy had fully crystallized into a concrete plan, and I was entirely committed to making Olivia the center of my remaining years. I trusted her implicitly, handing over the keys to my emotional sanctuary without a single moment of hesitation or doubt. We spent hours discussing the cultural differences, with her patiently explaining the traditions of her country and how much she valued loyalty and provision in a husband. She made me feel like my age was my greatest asset, a symbol of wisdom and stability that she desperately craved in her chaotic life. The psychological manipulation was absolutely flawless, exploiting every single vulnerability, every hidden insecurity, and every unfulfilled desire I harbored. Looking back, I should have realized that a flawlessly perfect narrative is always fiction, and that it was far too good to be true, but I simply did not want to see the truth. The shift in the dynamic was so subtle, so masterfully executed, that I didn't even recognize it as a warning sign when it finally happened. We were on a video call, and she seemed unusually quiet, her normally bright eyes downcast, a tear perfectly timed to fall as I asked what was wrong. She hesitated, playing the role of the proud, independent woman reluctant to ask for help, before finally confessing that she was short on her apartment rent for the month. It was a relatively small amount, just a few $100s, and my immediate instinct was to protect her, to prove that I was the reliable provider she believed me to be. I sent the money the very next morning, feeling a surge of masculine pride as her profound gratitude washed over me through the screen. I rationalized it easily. What kind of partner would I be if I let the woman I loved face eviction over an amount that was trivial to me? My finances were like a massive, secure water reservoir, and this small request was just a microscopic crack in the dam, entirely insignificant to the overall structure. I didn't realize that the first transaction fundamentally changed the nature of our relationship, establishing the precedent that my love could be quantified and accessed as currency. A few weeks later, the second request arrived, this time disguised as an investment in her future, a need for professional clothes for a new job interview she claimed to have lined up. Once again, the amount was plausible, the reasoning sound, and the emotional payoff of her joy was more than enough to justify the wire transfer. I told myself that I was investing in our shared future, helping her build a stable foundation so she wouldn't have to struggle until I finally arrived in Bangkok. Every time I sent money, the affection intensified, creating a Pavlovian response where I equated financial sacrifice with guaranteed love and intimacy. Then came the request for a salon visit and a new dress for a family wedding, an event she said she was dreading because her relatives would judge her appearance. She cried, talking about the pressure and the shame of looking poor, and my savior complex flared up instantly, eager to rescue her from any distress. I transferred the funds, convincing myself that ensuring her happiness and social standing was my duty as her future husband. The cracks in the reservoir were multiplying, the water slowly starting to seep out, but I was too distracted by the beautiful reflection on the surface to notice the structural failure. The emergencies became slightly more frequent and a bit more expensive. A sudden internet bill that threatened to cut off our communication, a medical prescription for an ailing aunt. Each crisis was presented with just enough panic to trigger my protective instincts, followed by a shower of relief and devotion once the money cleared. I never questioned the receipts or the circumstances, fully believing that this string of bad luck was genuine and that my support was the only thing keeping her afloat. I was no longer just a romantic partner, I was a fully operational crisis management fund, happily draining my own resources to maintain the illusion of control. I defended these actions fiercely in my own mind, pushing down the faint, logical voice in my head that suggested I was being exploited. I told myself that cultural differences meant families relied on each other differently in Thailand, and that as her future husband, her burdens were automatically my burdens. I actively built a fortress of justification around every wire transfer, terrified that acknowledging the truth would mean losing the only source of light in my life. I was actively participating in my own robbery, willingly handing over the keys to the vault because the thief had a beautiful smile. The requests seamlessly transitioned from emergencies to lifestyle upgrades, always framed as preparations for my eventual arrival and our life together. She needed a better phone to ensure our video calls were high quality, then a new laptop to start taking online English classes to communicate better with my family. Each item was purchased with my money, justified as a necessary stepping stone toward our perfect, shared existence. The reservoir was draining faster now, the pressure mounting, but I kept patching the holes with blind faith and desperate rationalization. She started talking about the societal expectations in her culture, subtly introducing the concept of the sin sod, a traditional dowry meant to honor her parents and prove my financial capability. It was presented not as a demand, but as a beautiful ancient tradition that would secure our union and grant us the blessing of her entire community. She assured me that the money was often just for show during the ceremony and would be returned to us to start our life, a symbolic gesture of respect. I swallowed the lie whole, viewing it as an exotic, romantic hurdle I needed to clear to finally claim my prize. The escalation was relentless, but it felt like a natural progression toward our ultimate goal, the final steps of a marathon I was determined to finish. When she finally brought up the costs of the wedding itself, the venue in Bangkok, the elaborate ceremony, and the flights for her extended family, the numbers were staggering. It was no longer a matter of a few $100s, we were talking about liquidating a massive portion of my retirement savings. My heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on my back, but I looked at her face on the screen and told myself that this was the cost of true happiness. The proposition was framed perfectly. This large, final investment would solidify our future, satisfy all cultural obligations, and clear the path for a lifetime of uninterrupted peace. I was standing at the edge of a massive cliff, staring down into the terrifying unknown of my financial future, my logical mind screaming at me to step back. But she was standing on the air in front of me, smiling, promising me that if I just took the leap of faith, wings would sprout on the way down. I closed my eyes, silenced my doubts, and decided to jump. I walked into my local bank branch on a Tuesday morning, my stomach churning with a sickening mixture of absolute terror and wild, reckless anticipation. I sat across from the teller, a young woman who looked at me with a fleeting expression of pity as I ordered the international wire transfer of $50,000. It was the vast majority of my liquid assets, decades of labor and sacrifice condensed into a single digital transaction bound for an agency account in Thailand. The teller asked if I was absolutely certain, and with a dry mouth and a trembling hand, I signed the authorization, passing the point of no return. The immediate aftermath of the transfer was a rush of adrenaline, a forced euphoria as I messaged Olivia to tell her the funds were on the way to secure our wedding. Her response was ecstatic, filled with emojis, promises of eternal love, and a countdown to the day I would finally step off the plane in Bangkok. For 24 hours, I floated on a cloud of absolute certainty, convinced that I had just made the smartest, bravest decision of my entire life. But the following morning, when I sent my usual "good morning" message, the delivery receipt remained unread. I didn't panic immediately, rationalizing that she was busy with the wedding planners, or perhaps her new phone was acting up, inventing a dozen innocent excuses for the silence. By the evening, my messages were still pending, and my calls to her number went straight to a sterile, automated voice message in a language I couldn't understand. The cold, creeping dread started in the pit of my stomach, spreading outward like ice water through my veins as I stared at the blank screen. I stayed up the entire night, refreshing the app, my heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. On the third day of absolute silence, I tried to access the Asian Bride Agency website to contact their support team and inquire about Olivia. The vibrant, professional webpage that had been my portal to paradise was completely gone, replaced by a generic error screen stating the domain was no longer active. The email addresses bounced back, the phone numbers were disconnected, and every single digital trace of the organization had evaporated into thin air. The truth hit me with the devastating force of a freight train. There was no wedding, there was no future, and my money was gone. It was as if I was sitting in a crowded theater, deeply invested in a beautiful romantic play, and suddenly the curtain dropped right in the middle of the act. The house lights slammed on, brutally bright, revealing that the lush tropical scenery was just cheap cardboard, and the actors had already packed up and fled out the back door. There was no explanation, no closure, no dramatic final argument, just an instant suffocating silence and the glaring reality of my own unfathomable stupidity. I fell to my knees in my living room, letting out a raw, guttural scream of pure agony as the illusion shattered completely. Driven by a sheer, blinding desperation and an inability to accept the finality of the loss, I booked a flight to Bangkok with the last bit of credit I had left. I convinced myself there had to be a misunderstanding, a technical glitch, a governmental issue, anything but the reality that I had been ruthlessly scammed. I landed in the sweltering heat of Thailand, armed with the address she had given me for her apartment and the alleged location of the agency's headquarters. I navigated the chaotic streets, a sweating, frantic foreigner chasing a ghost through a city that did not care about my existence. The agency address was a vacant lot between two dilapidated commercial buildings, and the apartment building she claimed to live in had no record of anyone by her name. I stood on the pavement in Bangkok, the tropical sun beating down on me, completely stripped of my dignity, my money, and my sanity. The utter humiliation of the moment broke whatever fragile resolve I had left, realizing I had flown halfway across the world to attend a funeral for a relationship that never existed. I was a shipwreck survivor washing up on a foreign beach with nothing but the clothes on my back, staring at the distant, sunken wreckage of my own life. That night I walked into a dingy, neon-lit bar in the tourist district, the overwhelming noise and chaos a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence in my head. I sat down, looked at the bartender, and ordered a double whiskey, breaking years of sobriety in a single defeated motion. The alcohol burned going down, a familiar toxic comfort that temporarily numbed the agonizing pain of the betrayal and the terrifying reality of my financial ruin. I looked at myself in the mirror behind the bar, seeing the exact same broken, hopeless alcoholic I had been before Olivia. Only now, I was entirely destitute. I am recording this not for sympathy, but to serve as a blaring, unavoidable warning siren for any man who is standing where I stood a year ago. If you are a man over 60, sitting alone in a quiet house, browsing through catalogs of foreign women, and believing that your pension makes you a king, you need to listen to me. You are not discovering a secret oasis of traditional romance. You are walking directly into a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar industry designed to emotionally butcher you and drain your accounts. The women on those screens are not your salvation. They are bait, and you are the prey in a game you do not even realize you are playing. Do not let your loneliness convince you that a 25-year-old woman halfway across the world is genuinely in love with your soul. If it looks like a catalog, run. If she asks for rent money, block her number. And if you ever find yourself rationalizing why you need to send thousands of dollars to prove your love, you are already drowning. I am a lighthouse built on the jagged rocks of my own total destruction, and my only purpose now is to desperately signal you to turn your ship around before it is too late. Now you know the absolute truth, the brutal reality of the game they play. The choice is yours. Listen to the fool who lost everything, or keep scrolling and prepare to lose it all yourself. If this warning resonated with you, if it opened your eyes even a fraction, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next hard truth. Stay sharp, stay cynical, and protect yourselves, because nobody else out there is going to do it for you.